see this later on. Just want to confirm, I have Amy here with me. Amy, I want to make sure you can see the presentation, correct?
Okay. I can. Thanks, Graham.
Awesome. Just wanted to confirm. Nobody told me they couldn't, but I didn't want to assume. So we will go ahead and get rolling. So some quick introductions, and we'll give you all a couple minutes to do this. As we're talking, as Amy and I are introducing ourselves, if you could, in the chat, give your name and your role, just quick role. Don't feel like you have to give your full title like Amy and I have. Just kind of your role as it relates to graduation and student success planning. And then one word to describe your thoughts about the coming school year, just to get an idea of how folks are feeling. So go ahead and start throwing that in the chat, and I will go ahead and introduce myself. Hello, my name is Graham Wood. I am the Graduation Requirements Program Administrator at the Ohio Department of Education. I work in the Center for Teaching, Leading, and Learning. I have a background in career tech originally at the department. I was in the Office of Career Technical Education for a couple years, and before that I was a teacher. I was a Teach for America Corps member in Dayton, Ohio, and I taught nowhere near the high school level. I was a kindergarten teacher and a 5th grade math teacher in my time. And I am blessed today to be joined by the esteemed Amy Szymanski. Amy, do you want to take a moment and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Graham. That was quite a welcome. I appreciate it. My name is Amy Szymanski, and I work directly with the Office for Exceptional Children out of the State Support Team Region 1, which is located in Toledo. And I have been around for a really long time, so I think I've probably met many of you in some capacity. I have been with the department for 6 years now, and prior to that held a host of experiences from teaching students with disabilities at the elementary and middle school age to providing special education coordination services at the high school level. So kind of a mixed bag. I also worked on a lot of research projects with the American Institutes for Research on dropout prevention. So Graham knows that this graduation planning and student success planning is quite a passion for me. So I'm really happy to be here with you and excited to have some great discussion.
Yeah, and oh, there's my dryer going off. You'll find I am new to a lot of this work, especially as it relates to graduation requirements. I'm came to this position right at the beginning of our stay-at-home order here in Ohio, and it's been a learning process for me. But though I don't have direct experience working with graduation plans prior to this, these plans have become a huge passion for me as well, because of all of the value that I see that can come with them, especially as I came to learn these long-term requirements. There's a lot there. There's a lot of opportunity, and I think the graduation plans are a good way to organize and to put these plans, or put students in a position where they can really take advantage of these requirements. So seeing a lot of different words to describe how folks are feeling. Some folks cheating, sharing more than one word, which is a little disconcerting, but we'll allow it. Learning, ambiguous. I'm seeing innovative. It's always interesting. I've used this activity a couple times recently at the beginning of presentations, and there's always a mixed bag of folks that are feeling, innovative and excited about it. But I'm also seeing anxious, nervous, uneasy. Tumultuous, and those are all, very, very important words too, because I'm sure many of our students are feeling that way as well as they look at what the future looks like. But we appreciate all of you coming to join us today to talk through this important piece of our high school kiddos' education, and dipping down into middle school as it relates to student success plans. And we hope that this can be a valuable piece of your tool belt, not just generally into the future, but also now in this uncertain time that we're in. I think that the idea of planning for a future that might be a little more normal than the one we're in might be a really important piece for our students. So just want to get everybody in that context of, we're planning for the immediate future, but also thinking forward into the future that is to come. So thank you all for sharing your thoughts and being willing to be open. And we hope that you're willing to share more with us over the course of this conversation today, because though we have some information for you, we want this to be a session where y'all can talk to each other and discuss and think through, how best to implement graduation plans right now, and the value and the role that they can play. So onward. So graduation plans are the newest piece of this conversation, and they came about as a part of last year's state budget. House Bill 166 stated a requirement for all school districts to have a policy for the identification of students that are at risk of not earning a diploma. So that policy was originally required by June 30th, and due to the COVID-19 pandemic, that was pushed back to September 30th of 2020, that your school or district will have to adopt that policy. But this policy must include some criteria for how these students are going to be identified. How are you going to know that a student is at risk for not receiving a diploma? It'll have procedures, for identifying those students. Exactly what, with these criteria that we're going to look at what point do we identify a student as being at risk of not earning a diploma? Also a process for notifying both the students, their guardians, and the folks that will be supporting that student. And then it has to map out the instructional supports that student's going to receive, and not just the instructional support, but any surrounding support services. And there are many of those that can be included. It shouldn't just be an academic thought mindset, because a lot of reasons why a student might be at risk of not earning a diploma have little or nothing to do with their academics. It has to do with their emotional state, the situation that they're in life. So ensuring that you're thinking through all of those pieces is really helpful and important. And the last piece that we're going to focus on a ton today is graduation planning. So the requirement included in this policy is that each student in grades 9 through 12 have a graduation plan. So there has to be a plan in place through this policy for each student 9 through 12 to have that graduation plan. And that's now required by September 30th of this year. We have folks implementing that differently throughout the state, and that makes sense. The requirement is not for everybody to adopt the same policy. The requirement is for everyone to adopt a policy that makes sense for them in their context. And it's important to remember that is that your plan might look completely different from somebody else's plan, might look completely different from somebody else's plan. And that's okay, because Ohio's a big place with a lot of different looking districts and a lot of different looking needs. And that's important to remember. So we're going to talk today about two pieces of the graduation plan, kind of the requirements that you need to have that are written out in the law, and then some recommendations, the things that if you're going to implement these graduation plans with fidelity and really take advantage of them to their fullest extent, that'll be helpful. So the requirements is that they're developed collaboratively and updated yearly. So it needs to happen with the student and hopefully their parent or guardian, to have that conversation with them and develop that plan and talk through what that plan would be. What are the students' goals? Where do they want to go? Where do they want to go after graduation? And let's take some time now to think through how we can use their time before graduation to best prepare them. Identifying that student's pathway. There is a lot, like I said, in these long-term graduation requirements that can be frankly confusing, not only to students, but to adults in their life, their parents. They look at these long-term requirements and say, whoa, there's a lot here. And thinking through all the different options is really important. So identifying that student's pathway and figuring out what steps they're going to take, and hopefully some backup plans to know, if this doesn't work out, here's what we're going to do. The graduation plan needs to be a factor in identifying what students are at risk of not earning a diploma. And to me, that's just common sense. If you have this plan and you have this idea of what track a student's going to take to get to and through graduation, if they're off track from that, that should be a factor in deciding whether or not that student is more at risk than others for not earning a diploma. So that's, if you're going to create these plans, it's really, really helpful. And we're seeing some awesome questions in the chat and some awesome comments. We'll make sure we're pulling on those as well. It should, and this is really a huge piece of what we're going to talk about today, is that it should supplement and enhance a career advising policy and a student success plan. This shouldn't be something that's happening off on its own. A student shouldn't just have a graduation plan that lives separate from all the other plans and pieces and policies that are in place to help students get through and get to graduation with a lot of their future plans in mind. So we'll talk a lot about today how these things align and how best to make that happen. And then the other piece that is called out in law is that an IEP, an individualized education program, may be utilized as a student's graduation plan if the academic goals included are substantively similar. And Amy is the expert on this, so I'm going to let her speak a little bit more later on. But the situations where an IEP actually would, completely meet that aren't that often. So often, a student would need a graduation plan and should have a graduation plan in addition to and in concert with their IEP. So that's what's required. That's what needs to be in a graduation plan. But some of the recommendations, go a little bit beyond that or have us think deeper about what the purpose of a graduation plan is and what power it can hold. And Amy, I know you had some thoughts on this slide, so feel free to jump in at any point and interrupt me if I'm talking too much, which I usually do, so that's totally fine. For graduation plans, it should empower students to set future goals. Kind of touching on some of the pieces that we've had questions on, is there a model template for the graduation plan similar to the template for student success plans? That is something that we are working on. I'm going to give you some screenshots of what we're working on right now, and it's very rough. It hasn't been through our communications team at all, so forgive us for it not looking gorgeous, but it'll give you an idea of what that plan might look like. And, one of the pieces at the top of our plan is, what are your career goals? Asking the student, what do you want to do? And it doesn't have to be written in pen. This is something that can easily be written in pencil and something that a student can work on and develop and experience things on their way to graduation and decide, no, I don't want that anymore. I'm not interested in that. I want to shift somewhere else, or I want to, change my goals. Great. We learned something. That's awesome. That's, a huge part of what planning is that you at least have something that you're working toward that you can say, no, not anymore. So it really can be an opportunity to empower those students to set some future goals and have some idea of where they're moving. And it also can facilitate a backwards planning process. If you know where you're headed toward, if you know where you want to go after graduation, you can think through, all right, here are the steps that we need to take to get there. And here's how we get to that point, thinking about here's where we want to be, here's where we are right now. There's quite a path that we need to take to get there, and what are the steps there. And when we think about how graduation plans fit into the Career Connections framework, I see them as a huge part of when you shift, thinking about in elementary and early middle school, you have career awareness, and then you're shifting in middle school into career exploration. There's some pieces of career exploration that shift into the high school, but you really should be shifting toward career planning. And I think a graduation plan is a very, very nice option because it's happening for every student as to where to shift that mindset from, all right, you've dipped your toes in the water in a lot of these places. Let's think about what we've learned and where we might want to go. I see a graduation plan as a key part of shifting that mindset into the career planning. And using these long-term requirements as a way to say, all right, let's do a little more exploration pointed in a direction. So if a student says, I'm really interested in being an engineer, that's where I want to, That's where I want to go. That's what I want to, point my brain toward. You think, all right, probably are going to need to go to college, whether that's starting out at a 4-year institution, a 2-year institution, or getting some, on the ground experience potentially in construction. Here's some ideas of where you can go if you have the end goal of becoming an engineer. Let's think about, you're probably going to need quite a bit of math and science. So when you're looking at picking that student's, curriculum package, that needs to be a part of their graduation plan, and you can think with that goal in mind. And think about also what makes the most sense if this student isn't meeting their competency score, or does it make sense to already start pointing them towards some of the competency alternatives that are more aligned with a career in engineering? Also, what SEALs make the most sense for a student that's interested in being an engineer to earn? Let's not just think about what are the easiest SEALs for the student to earn, what are the ones that are just going to check the box. What makes the most sense for this student? Because there's a large menu of those that are there, and providing them those opportunities earlier on can be really important. And like I said, and we've mentioned this, and it'll continue to come up as Amy discusses this. Think about how this aligns to your other work. Think about how this aligns to the whole Career Connections framework. Think about how this aligns to your career advising policy. Think about how this aligns with a student's IEP, with a student success plan, and all those other pieces. It's important to not see this out on an island, and it's important not to have these conversations out on an island, because the conversation that lands a student on their goals that are going to go on their graduation plan should be the same conversation. If a student has an IEP, we have a visitor. If the student has an IEP, it should be the same conversation that's happening where they're setting their goals for their IEP. Those goals should be talking to each other. They should mirror each other. It makes a lot of sense for these conversations to be happening together. So that's really important.
Graham, and I just wanted to add one piece. I agree completely with everything that you've said, and Graham and I have talked a lot about these recommendations, and I think you've pretty much echoed every comment that I would have made, so thank you for doing that. The only thing I just want to kind of tie together is just remembering how important we are as educators, working with the students and the families to empower them to make those decisions that are the best fit, and to really help them make informed decisions, to ensure that we aren't inadvertently predetermining any of their future goals, or maybe not providing access to the full array of opportunities and ideas that other students may have, or all students may have. We're just really hopeful that this planning process can open up a lot of opportunities to students that may not have seen those as opportunities before. So I just want to make sure I have that kind of down for the record as we move forward.
Yeah, and thank you, Amy. I really appreciate that. And specifically to call out some of the folks that were asking about a sample policy as well, in addition to kind of a template. There are folks that have come out with sample policies that you may have interest in looking to. I know Neola especially has come out with a sample policy that it may be helpful to just take a look at when thinking through setting your own district policy or considering that conversation. So what needs to be included in a graduation plan? I want to share here that this is not set in stone, the requirement of exactly what needs to be in a graduation plan. This is just through conversation, me and Amy. I know Cassie and Kayla, who are both on this call, and we've thought through and talked through what a graduation plan needs to be, and it based on the legislation, it's really thinking through how this student is going to meet those graduation requirements, thinking through what path a student should take through this large menu of options in these new long-term requirements, and what makes the most sense for them that aligns with all of their other goals and their ideas about where they want to be 1 year, 2 years, 4 years after graduation, and making sure that this key time, this 4 years where the student has this opportunity, that it's pointed towards something and pointed toward a future. So thinking about those three parts of the long-term requirements, ensuring that each of those parts is addressed in a graduation plan. And you'll see that in the screenshots that I'll show you here in a moment. But thinking through those course requirements, the statewide minimum is 20 credits. Your district may require more. Having a section in there as to exactly how a student is going to meet those credit requirements. What courses are they going to take their freshman year? What courses are they going to take sophomore? What courses have they already taken in middle school that can apply for credit? And keeping track of that and having it planned out from the beginning so that, say a student does earn credit, that's a factor that says, all right, maybe now this student is at risk and they need a little additional help here. They need some supports. And we can start to ask, why did you not earn that credit? What happened there? And what can we do to help? That what can we do to help part is definitely a piece that should be included in that at-risk policy, but it can be identified from that graduation plan. So thinking through that and thinking through what courses students should take, not just, having, the standard set of courses and say, all right, every student gets this on their graduation plan and that's it. Thinking through what different options are available to students can be really important or helpful. And for competency, obviously students need to meet that competency score of 684 in Algebra 1 and English Language Arts 2. Beyond that, looking at the competency alternatives and saying, all right, in the event that the student doesn't meet these scores, what alternatives make the most sense? And can we start planning toward those now, scheduling some assessments, thinking through where that student might access those competency alternatives, and at least having that conversation from the beginning to be able to set them up for success in the event that they haven't met that competency score. And then once again, the seal requirements. Students need to earn 2 of those seals. At least one of them must be state defined. And what are best going to prepare the student for their future? What seals make the most sense for their goals that sit at the top of this success or this graduation plan? And I think that's a really important question to ask as we go through this. So thinking through a graduation plan template, here's a quick example, and I haven't included all of it here. Just wanted to show some quick shots of what we've got as a rough draft right now. Thinking about, who is this student? What are their career field interests? And what are their goals post high school? And you want to be specific. Obviously, anytime you're setting goals, it's really helpful to use that SMART goal format because it brings everything together and make sure that a goal is valuable and that there's an ability to check whether or not a student is on their way to meeting that goal. That's really helpful. Here's a mock-up of how we have mapped out some of the credit requirements for a graduation plan. So thinking through, what are they earning in middle school? What have they earned freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, senior year, and planning that out. And you'll want to be probably more specific than what we've got here, and that's okay. We've just got, some general requirements up on the screen just to give you an example of exactly what's happening. But having a section that shows, here's the plan, here's how much they've earned versus what they need, and thinking through that. And Shelby, I see your question about how this plan is different from the current student success plan. This plan you'll see doesn't have as much included. The graduation plan talks specifically toward meeting the graduation requirements with a slightly smaller focus on exactly the students, career plans and goals and really what's happening there. And every student will need to have a graduation plan. The student success plan is a lot more robust and thinks through a lot more and involves quite a bit more planning there, but is specifically for students who are identified as at risk of dropping out of high school. So that's kind of the difference there, is that this one's a little slimmer, but is for every student. And the student success plan is a lot broader, but is specifically for students that fall in that category of being at risk of dropping out. The nice thing about a graduation plan is that if a student has a graduation plan, that'll immediately fill out quite a bit of their student success plan. It should align pretty well as we're thinking through that. Great question, Shelby. Appreciate you asking.
And Shelby, this is Amy Graham. I just was going to jump in. Shelby, I think that hopefully we'll be able to cover a little bit more of that in a few slides. So if you still have that question at the end, we'll jump back to it, but I might be able to cover some of that in a few slides.
Perfect. Thank you, Amy. Yeah, so another piece to think through is demonstration of competency. This maps out for you, ensuring that a student, has their first attempt, their retest in each of these tests if they did not meet the competency score the first time. And then the additional requirement in legislation is that they have additional support, remediation between those two tests. So it has a spot for you to write down that additional support to ensure that that student has met that requirement. And then talking through all our alternative options. And we have all of these on here. It cut off here because it goes on to another page, but I wanted to show, thinking through different pieces of our alternative options to demonstrate competency and thinking through which ones make the most sense for a student. And this is an area that I think we want to build out a little bit more because there's a lot in these alternative options and a lot of different ways to meet them. But we're trying to make sure that there's space for those in each student's graduation plan. And yes, the presentation will be available. This is the last piece, is thinking about what seals a student earned. And you'll see here that we've listed out the seals on this page, but there's another page that maps out exactly how a student's going to earn their 2 seals, and then provides another space for a student to plan out. We all know there's going to be ambitious students that decide 2 seals. That doesn't sound like enough. I need to earn 8 of them. And heard a lot of stress from folks around, tracking that many seals. And I think there's a balance there to say, all right, we've got these 2. These are the ones you're directly using to graduate based on. Here's the ones that we're going to track as a team. And then, if a student is interested in earning those seals, put a little bit of the onus on the student to say, all right, we've got these 2 on here. You can go ahead. Here's your graduation plan. Track them. Come on in and update these. And this graduation plan does need to be updated every year. So there's an opportunity for you to continue to have that dialogue with that student and to update it. So those are some examples of what we're working on at this point. We're hoping that we can build that out quite a bit more and have it available closer to the start of the school year. But wanted to pause for a moment about halfway in and talk through some pieces. So I'm going to stop talking and feel free to either in the chat or in the or by just unmuting and speaking, give us some answers to these questions. Think through what are your answers, or if you don't have an answer, if you're confused or unsure at this point, share that. That's valuable for us to hear as well, and we want to be able to talk that through with you. And I am 100% sure that you are not the only one with that question if you have a question. So please, in the chat or out loud, share your thoughts on any of these questions. What resources would be helpful to support creation of these graduation plans? What are you doing now that's similar? And I think we've kind of already identified that. Student success plans really are pretty similar, and there's other pieces that you may be doing in their district that weren't required, but are aligned with this, that counselors are engaging in, or somebody else at the school. And the third question I wanted to put specifically in the context of COVID. How can this be implemented, especially in different scenarios? So say you go back to school in the fall and everything is remote. How are you going to implement graduation plans in a remote setting? If you're choosing to go back in the fall and it's a hybrid model where some students are in and others are not. So, the time that a student is in school might, the entire time they're spent in a classroom, that might be tougher to implement. So how can you implement it in those different scenarios, and thinking through that, or if you have any ideas of how that's going to happen, share with us. Christine, so you said the graduation plan is for all students. It is a part of the district's policy for identifying students that are at risk of not earning a diploma. It's a factor in, determining whether or not that student is at risk. But every student should have a graduation plan. And that policy for determining whether or not students are at risk, for identifying those students, should include in there how every student is going to have a graduation plan and kind of what the process is going to be for getting every student a graduation plan. That should be included in that policy, and how they're going to be updated year after year.
Graham, I noticed that someone had their hand raised. I don't know if you saw that.
I saw that as well, but it appears to have gone away. Oh,
hey, Graham, this is Bill Stratton. I had my hand raised, and I'm not sure you can hear me or not.
We can hear you.
Okay,
yep.
Great. Okay, my background, I'm an education specialist for the Army, actually retired school counselor and teacher. But a lot of people, they watch TV and they see what they think the Army is, but there's like over 150 different career fields in the Army. Okay. So how do we, as far as the enlistment seal, as far as a resource that would be helpful would be to invite, say, an Army recruiter to come to the schools at the 9th and 10th grade level to talk about military careers. So how would we promote that throughout the state? That's my question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll be very honest. That's been something that has been a priority for me, and was a priority for me before leaving the office, but has not been something that I've been able to directly engage with. Is working with our military partners. I know Sarah did a great job before, and Sarah Wilson is who I'm referring to for anybody. She previously held my position. She did a great job of engaging with some of our military partners, and that's relationships that I'd like to build up to be able to promote. But I think it's just a matter of knowing the folks in each area and being able to promote, here's your contact, here's who you should reach out to, and connect schools with those folks, because I'm betting that is something that a lot of schools would be excited about and interested in, to ensure that students really have an understanding of what it means to join the military. Because I think you're right. There's not a clear idea of exactly what that means unless you know somebody that has joined the military and taken, a career path that might be one of the ones that people immediately think of when they think of, joining the military. So that's a really helpful point. And yeah, I think that's something that we can do a better job of making sure that we promote who the partners are, and who your contact might be. Thank you.
The state does a great job. The Purple Star School program, and they recognize students who enlist. But the fact is, 3 out of 10 people qualify. So tattoos, moral character development, physical fitness. There's a lot of things that would help young students, if they're thinking about military service, they should understand the requirements early on. So just wanted to point that out. It's really 3 out of 10 people qualify. So when a recruiter talks to a person at a high school, they're really trying to show the career intent. What's the military have to offer? College tuition reimbursement and things like that. So yeah, point taken. I appreciate the opportunity to listen in and what everyone's talking about here. So thanks again.
Can I ask a clarifying question? When you say 3 out of 10 people qualify, is that at the point where they choose to say, I would like to enlist, or is that just generally looking at the population? Because I'm thinking, and I'll share why I asked that question so it doesn't feel like I'm leading you down a road. When you say, thinking about coming in the freshman or sophomore year, to me, hopefully that would mean that more students, if they understood what it actually takes to qualify, could be preparing themselves along that road, so that maybe by the time that a student is eligible, it's not 3 out of 10, it's 5 out of 10 or 6 out of 10, yes, because those folks understand what it takes. Does that align with what you were saying?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying, because really, and a lot of people join the military after they've been out of high school a few years, but 3 out of 10. So basically, to pass the test, okay? To pass the ASVAB test. Right now, the current score is a 31, but that's number one. Of course, physical fitness and then moral character. So if you have criminal records, that usually creates a problem. And then tattoos. Basically, you're not allowed to have tattoos on your face or your hands and things like that. So a lot of young folks, if they knew this stuff early on, if they knew the requirements, I think it would help them out throughout high school.
Thank you. Appreciate you sharing that. And yeah, I hear what you're saying, and that's something really valuable and something that we can make sure, we're trying to get that word out. I'm seeing some great stuff in the chat. Tanisha, that is exactly where my head is at with, creating some ideas of where a student's going to go, and doing that, virtually might be a huge motivator for a student in this context. It might be something that they're striving for. And Farida, good to know that you're doing something similar already to this. And that's exactly, I think, what the idea is of these graduation plans, is that they're happening in the onboarding process when a student's a freshman, and that it's something that they can think through, throughout their high school career and have that idea. And where are the graduation plans housed? That's a great question. Now, I think that right now, there's not a specific reporting program in EMIS. We're hoping to be able to create processes where this can be included and shared, but that's not up and alive yet. But stay tuned for that. But it is required that you review the graduation plan with the student every year. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing it more often than that. If you have the resources and the capacity to do it semester after semester, awesome. Or even more often than that. I mean, I don't think there's any issue with checking in on goals more often. So I am going to go ahead and I've taken up way too much time, so I'm going to toss it to Amy. And we'll have some time for discussion and questions at the end as well. But I want to make sure Amy has time to go through her slides. So I'll toss it to you, Amy.
Thanks, Graham. And thanks to all of you for your comments in the chat box. I think it's really helpful to everyone to see what's happening right now. And I think most importantly to recognize that there are a lot of things that we're already doing that we can turn into our graduation plans and our student success plans. So we're not reinventing the wheel. So I think it's always important to recognize what we are doing and how those connections can be made. I'm just going to do a quick overview of how, through my lens, how everything connects. And so for those of you who are familiar with multi-tiered systems of support, or the MTSS, you're going to likely recognize this triangle or cone. This is what I feel is kind of the best representation of how service delivery is provided across that continuum. And this is what we need to be thinking about if we want to make sure we meet the needs of each student. You'll note here in the way that this is displayed that the supports build upon each other and become increasingly intensive. So if we're properly implementing our supports, the number of students who need those supports should be decreasing as the intensity of the support increases. So if you happen to stumble upon a flipped or inverted cone in which most of your students in your district or in your school or in your classroom need intensive supports, we need to go back and look at the core. And that's really where that graduation planning and that graduation plan becomes so important. So we start by providing all students with a differentiated core of services and supports. You might have also heard it called a universal support or a tier 1 support. And then we recognize that some, and this is a rough percentage of about 15% of our students are going to need more than those universal supports. And when this occurs, you're going to provide those universal supports and then add on the supplemental, sometimes they're called targeted or tier 2 supports. Then you're going to have about 5% of your student population who, in addition to the universal and the supplemental supports, are going to need that intensive support in order to experience success. So hopefully what you're starting to see is, again, where that graduation plan and then that student success plan really fit into the continuum. Graham, if you want to go on to the next slide. We'll go a little more into the legislation, again, around the graduation plan. So hopefully, Shelby, this kind of provides a little more clarity around how these all connect. Each student, per legislation, will need to have a graduation plan if they're enrolled in grades 9 through 12. And so we can consider that the universal, the each. I saw somewhere in the chat box that someone asked, is this related to an early warning system? Absolutely, it is, in the sense that we'll have kind of a universal screen to say, these are all the things that students need in order to be on track towards graduation. And then we'll move forward and determine if in fact they're not on track, and then that will identify the need for a student success plan. So if you go on to the next slide, Graham, you'll see that the student success plan becomes that supplemental support. Now, we know that it does begin in grade 6 through 12, or I'm sorry, it begins in grade 6. So if you're working in a high school, you're going to have students coming into your high school already with the student success plan in place. And really the difference here, you'll see we have a few slide shots coming up of the student success plan. This is more intervention based, and right? So we're going to talk about what the preferences, interests, needs, and strengths are of these students. And then we're going to supply the additional interventions that they need to stay on track. We identify those students for a student success plan through the early warning indicators that are placed into our career advising policy and our at-risk for students who are not going to be graduating on time policies. So we use those policies to help us identify the students. We're going to have students who might fall into more of intensive services on that student success plan. Maybe there's a really specific, maybe a death in the family, for example, and they need some short-term individualized one-on-one counseling that might kind of bump you into the intensive level. But for the most part, we're going to see a student who has a graduation plan, then linked to a student success plan. But not every student necessarily has to have a student success plan, because not necessarily every student is going to be at risk for not graduating as well. I saw that Kayla had put in the chat box that we would love to see all students have a student success plan. And I think that that really mirrors a lot of what we're seeing in the chat box from others who say they have an individualized career plan or some kind of plan for all students. I think you can make it work in a variety of ways. We're just showing you kind of what the basics are based on the policies that legislation has put forth. Graham, if you want to go to the next slide. And so here is a template of the student success plan, and you'll see, again, this is just something that has been put together. You can develop your own, but this gives some career planning questions and experiences for students to consider. I know Kayla is the expert on this, so I don't want to take up any time that she would be able to explain this to you far more succinctly and comprehensively, but just so you got an idea of what the career student success plan can look like. Graham, if you want to go to the next slide. And then here is where we are tracking the assessments that may be happening. For those of you who are familiar with students with IEPs, you might want to think about some of this as age-appropriate transition assessment. Go ahead to the next slide, Graham. And then last, you'll see the different types of interventions that would be provided, or services and supports that would be provided, again, which may mirror some of our transition services that you might see in a student IEP. So speaking of the IEP, as Graham mentioned earlier, we do have legislation that says that the team may use the student's IEP in lieu of a separate graduation plan if the IEP contains those academic goals that are similar to a graduation plan. We know that students with disabilities who have IEPs have specially designed services that really fall into that intensive level. One of the things we want to be careful about as we think about whether or not the IEP team is going to use a graduation plan in lieu of the IEP in lieu of a graduation plan, is to make sure that we aren't denying the student access to all of the rich opportunities that are afforded to students within the graduation plan that you may be using in your district, and or if the student was at risk of dropping out, the student success plan. We always want to make sure that we are not forgetting that there is going to be opportunities that we don't want our students to miss out on. There is not a definition of substantively similar in legislation. So again, it's going to be the IEP team to determine that. But we have a few things, if you want to go to the next slide, Graham, that I'd love for you to consider as you are making those decisions. And it's, again, that students with disabilities are general education students first, which means that they have, again, access to that universal support of a graduation plan that all students have access to. We don't want to do any predetermination or, again, have them miss out on any opportunities. When you're thinking about whether or not you would use that plan, the IEP in lieu of the plan, think about what aspects of the graduation planning process or those components of the graduation plan in your district that are not addressed in the student IEP. And if there are areas and gaps, which we're pretty sure there will be, how are you going to incorporate those, or how are you going to make sure the students have access to those? And then finally, we certainly don't want anyone to have additional work. We don't want to have plans, as Graham said, that are misaligned or out there, floating in different spaces. So we do want to also ask you to consider how those graduation planning processes and components are addressed in the IEP. Or I could also insert the student success plan in this case. So how are those things addressed in the IEP? For those of you familiar with the IEP, part 5 of the IEP is a transition plan. Graham mentioned that there are goals in the graduation plan. There are post-secondary goals in the IEP. Is it possible for us to, write simply on the graduation plan, please see the IEP post-secondary goals in that goals section? Absolutely. Well, again, what we don't want to do is miss out on opportunities. I know there's a lot of school counselors on this call. You are experts in understanding graduation pathways and understanding how courses are selected and course options. We want to make sure that all of our students, each of our students, has access to your knowledge and to the knowledge that is really going to give them all that they need to make a good informed choice. So I think that's going to be something that we'll continue to work on as time goes on, but considerations for the time right now for you to think about. And I did see one question I wanted to double check before we get into discussion here. Josh had mentioned Ohio Revised Code requires success plans. Yes, so Ohio Revised Code does require success plans in grades 6 through 12 for students who are at risk based on the credentials, or I'm sorry, the indicators that are listed in the career advising policy. So hopefully I answered that question, Josh. And Shelby, also chime in if I didn't differentiate enough on that. But Graham, I'll toss it back to you to kind of begin the discussion.
Yeah. And we have about 9 minutes left, and really that's the information that we have, unless y'all have questions. The rest of this is just time to talk. How does this idea of aligning these things in a multi-tiered system of supports, how does that align with your current plan for implementing graduation plans? Are your graduation plans combined with those other things, or do you see that they're more siloed at this point? And how could that potentially change, and how could you align those a little better? The question that we were talking about earlier, how can a student's plan help motivate them in remote or hybrid models? How can you think through this as a opportunity to show students that what they're doing now, though they may not be in the building or it may not feel like normal school, this is contributing just as much as their normal school day to their future, and this is valuable time for them to be taking advantage of. And what do you see in your policy that we haven't talked about today? Is there anything that you imagine would be in a graduation plan that we didn't talk through? And we want to hear about that, because that's really important as we're trying to develop, a template. We don't want to miss pieces. We don't want to miss things that you think are important and should be included, or that you see as valuable. So once again, I'll be quiet, and we would love to hear from you.
I'll speak up. Hi, Betty Jo Malcheski from Perry Schools. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks, Betty.
Good. I guess in just seeing that first initial template, it made me wonder about the reoccurrence of having to place that information on yet another document when it's, stored electronically and as well. So what I'm thinking is we'll probably, unless we hear this is not a good idea, follow course on just what we typically do with our MTSS for anyone on a success plan. We kind of use that word generously with anyone that needs extra support at the school. So whether that be career advisement or whether it be social emotional or whether it be academic. So I think unless you recommend differently, we'll just stick with our system for MTSS where electronically we can always pull down that information. We can pull it up and print it if necessary, but at the same time electronically kind of assign people that committed and made agreements around the table on students to make sure that they're prompted if progress monitoring data is not in and whatnot. So does that sound okay that we wouldn't kind of get into the world of making yet another template to transpose information we have in-house onto?
I will say Amy or Cassie or Kayla, feel free to speak up. But to me, I think that a couple things. One, implementing this in the way that makes the most sense for you and your district and the policies that you already have in place. I think that the idea here is that this is a really valuable tool and resource, but as much as we can align it with current systems and current practices, it makes sense. I lost my second thought. There were two things, and I got one of them out before losing it. Essentially, I think that if that makes sense to you, and that's the way that you believe it'll be as well implemented as possible, that's great. Oh, the other thing, just make sure as you're going through it that all of the different pieces of what should be included in a graduation plan are addressed. That's really the only other piece is ensuring that if you are including it in another process or system, that it does fully map out that student's pathway to graduation there, and that it includes all the different parts and pieces, including their curriculum requirements, their plan to meet competency, whether it's directly or through the alternatives, and then their CO requirements. I think those are the three biggest things that need to be included there. And as long as you've got those included, I think that you're meeting the requirement and doing that.
Is that slide still, the information on that slide, is that still considered, in your opinion, a draft? Or do you see more coming onto those requirements?
I would say that is not necessarily requirements. Those are ideas and recommendations. I think that, at the end of the day, what's in legislation is that students must have a graduation plan. But beyond that, there's not much beyond what we've shared here that is going to be required, and really what we've shared here is not necessarily a requirement of law. It's ideas. It's a framework that makes a lot of sense and aligns with what those long-term requirements are. If yours looks completely different, that's
we're still
your
designing.
policy. Okay,
we're designing, just wanting to make sure we have current information on what you envision are the suggested pieces of information.
Yeah, what you saw today is the result of quite a bit of thought and conversation about what this plan should look like. So I don't foresee my thoughts and ideas on that changing an incredible amount.
Okay, and then you had mentioned, I think we were interpreting that the plans only needed to be in place by September, that September date for incoming ninth graders. Am I understanding it's a lot more students than that? Can you expand on that for us?
Yeah, so the what's required by September 30th is that there is a policy for identifying at-risk students, and included in that policy is a plan for every student to have a graduation plan. It doesn't specifically state in law that all students need to have a plan on September 30th, what was previously June 30th. It does not say that everybody 9 through 12 has to have a plan at that point. What's required at that date is that there is a policy in place. Some schools and districts will, require that all students have a plan at that point through their policy. Some will say, we're going to implement this kind of, as you said, like all freshmen will have a plan. One other one that I found interesting is that, this graduation plan, I think was created to align with these long-term requirements. And the first class that will have to fully engage with those long-term requirements will be this upcoming set of sophomores. As I think about it, the sophomores and juniors, or sophomores and freshmen, those are the students that have to engage with these long-term requirements. They're their only option. To me, it makes sense for those folks to have a graduation plan. I think it's a valuable resource for every student.
Sure.
And it'll play a different role depending on where a student is along their pathway to graduation. A lot of if you're writing a graduation plan for a senior, you're basically going to say, here's 85% is what you've done to this point. Here's this portion that you're going to do this year to meet, your requirements. But yeah, I think there's different ways to do that. But what's required on the 30th, what's required on September 30th is that the policy is in place.
And in talking with our super about that policy, the actual title is or number is what?
I
think we're talking Neola or whomever for guidance on that policy.
I believe somebody posted the Neola policy. I don't have that number memorized. I'm going to try and find it in the chat.
That's okay. You think it's in our
I'll
chat?
find it in the chat. It's in the chat.
It's in the chat. Yeah, it's definitely in the chat. I saw it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I will repost it so it's closer to the bottom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to Sarah who posted that.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Anybody else have questions or comments? Thanks, Amy.
Yep. Let's see. Can't tell if there's any additional questions we haven't addressed yet.
So Beth's asking again, with the requirement. There is no specific requirement in law that a class have graduation plans. The requirement in law is that a policy be in place on September 30th to identify students who are at risk of not earning a diploma, and to ensure that all students grades 9 through 12 have graduation plans. It does not state that all students need to have a plan by this date. It does not say that, students in the class of 2023 have to have a plan by this date. What it says is that the policy must be in place, and included in that policy has to be how you're going to get every student a graduation plan. So that is locally determined exactly how students are going to be folded into having a graduation plan. But I think that, it makes sense that, at the latest, every student should have a graduation plan by the time, a few years from now, when, if you chose to implement with freshmen this fall, that, each freshman class, so 4 years from now is when I would say, it makes sense to me that everybody should have a graduation plan. But, like I said, that's not a requirement in law. The requirement in law is for students to have, for districts to have a policy in place.
Graham, I think the last question has been, how will they access the PowerPoint?
And that is a good question. Because we don't have a specific event for this beyond just the Teams event, and we didn't have invites for all of you. I'm not sure we have emails. What we can do, and Cassie, I'll look for a nod of the head from you, is just post the PDF of this slide deck on our Career Connections resources and events page. I don't know the exact name of the page, but the page that would have the link to this. Does that make sense, Cassie?
Yep, that sounds great. And that's also where the survey is as well.
Oh, yes, that is where the survey is. And thank you for reminding me while we still have people here. Yeah, we have created a survey for all of these sessions that we're doing this summer series. And then Cassie has posted it so kindly in the chat for the summer series and the conference that we are having here a couple Mondays from now on the 27th. And we're really excited that you've joined us today. We hope you were able to join us last Monday and will join us next Monday. The following Monday, we're going to be having, a half-day conference that we're pretty excited about some of the speakers that we're working on lining up for that. So please, join us. And we look forward to hearing from you. Cassie, you're up next Monday. Am I correct?
Correct, Michelle and I.
Anything that
Yep.
you'd like to share? Yeah. Oh, you and Michelle. Yes. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah. Well, we hope that as an important part of your discussions with your students on graduation planning, that how students will experience the world of work is a part of that. So things like work-based learning, industry recognized credential attainment can all be a part of a student's graduation pathway. And our session on Monday is about connecting with employers through business advisory councils. So if you're involved in your business advisory council or wish you had more information on business advisory councils, definitely join us on Monday for a good session on the power of connecting with employers.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We appreciate your time. And if you have any more questions for us, feel free to reach out. I'm available at graham.wood@education.ohio.gov. Yeah, thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your Monday.
Thanks, everyone.